Today we are going to be talking about topic 2 that is, or topic lesson 2 that is in topic 10. You should be filling out your review sheet as we go along through this lesson today. You may need to stop the video here and there so you can fill out your notes as we go. So today we're going to be talking about voting qualifications and your right to vote. The first thing that you should know as far as setting voting qualifications, the federal government does not set very many voting qualifications. There are a few amendments to the Constitution that are set in regards to voting, but most of the qualifications are actually reserved for the states. The Constitution does set a few guidelines through amendments. The first amendment that we'll talk about is the 17th Amendment. And what this one basically says is that if you are allowed to vote for the most numerous branch of your own legislature or your state's legislature, you also have to be allowed to vote for your people in the House of Representatives, your senators in Congress as well. 17th Amendment does provide for the direct election of senators. The 15th Amendment, we talked about this some yesterday. This was one of the civil rights amendments. Basically, it states that no state can deprive a person of the right to vote on account of their race, their color, or their previous condition of servitude. This basically allowed African Americans to vote. The 19th Amendment, this says that no one can be deprived the right to vote on account of sex. This is the amendment that gave women the right to vote. The 24th Amendment we talked a lot about yesterday. This says that you cannot require a payment of a poll tax in order for a person to vote. And then the last one here is the 26th Amendment, and it says you cannot deprive someone who is at least 18 years of age of the right to vote. So those are the amendments that you need to have down. As we said, a lot of the qualifications do fall to the states to set who is allowed to vote. And on number 6, you'll see, can aliens vote? The answer to that is no, but the Constitution does not mention anything about it. So states can deny aliens the right to vote if they wish. But what most states do is they set that as a qualification of voting. So we're looking at number 7 here, qualifications for voting. States do set a qualification of citizenship. You must be a citizen of the state. Also, that's not required by the Constitution. States are also allowed to distinguish between someone who was born here or someone who came and was naturalized and took the test. If you were naturalized and took the test to become a citizen, they could make you wait longer to vote than somebody who was naturally born here. The states are allowed to distinguish between native-born and naturalized citizens. So the first one you need for a qualification of voting is citizenship. The second one that you need is residency. Okay, and a person must also be a legal resident of the state. Not only be a citizen of the United States, but you have to be a resident or live in the state in which you are wanting to vote. In the past, it said you had to be there for at least a year. Some states now, and now there's a federal law that says you can't set that for longer than 30 days. In Nebraska, you can actually register to vote on the same day that you become a resident to vote. As far as transients and what they allow, most states will not allow a transient or somebody who does not have a home, somebody that moves around a lot, to have a place or to be able to vote. Also, if they live in the state for only a short time, like a traveling sales agent, or maybe you're in the military or a college student, usually they are not allowed to vote as well. In several states, they've been talking about college students. Usually college students can't vote in the state where they hold temporary physical presence. But they are starting to change that a little bit. If you use your college residency and your community address as your legal address, you may be able to vote where you go to college. So your second one was residency. I think I skipped over the Voting Rights Amendments of 1970. We talked about the Voting Rights Act of 1965 yesterday, And there were lots of amendments to that. One of this is the amendment in 1970, and it banned any requirement longer than 30 days for you to be able to vote. So they can't make you wait longer than 30 days to vote in presidential elections. So that's what you need for that one. I think I also skipped number 8 here. Why have some states adopted residency requirements? And I have the answers in there for you, to make sure that you don't get a political machine in there that gets people from other states to cross the state line and vote in certain elections. It also allows the new voters time to study the issues and get to know the people before, so they can be an informed voter when they vote in the election. We talked about number 10 and the transients voting. The rules for college students and voting, again, we said most of the time they are not allowed to vote. They have to vote where their hometown is, but some states are now starting to waive that a little bit. Your third requirement that you need there is back on your number, letter C there, is laws and court actions. Okay. Nearly every state does prevent somebody who has been a criminal from actually voting in an election. And also if they have some mental illness, sometimes they do not allow them. And again, this goes into some of the residency requirements that we talked about as well. The fourth one then is an age requirement. The age requirement set by the Constitution through the 26th Amendment is 18. It can be less than that. Until 1970, only 4 states had put the age at less than 21. And a big reason, here we've got the residency requirements here, and a big reason why they did that has to do with the Vietnam War. Now you'll see on this slide here it says that some states allow 17-year-olds to vote in primary elections. If their 18th birthday falls after the primary but before the general election in November, some states will allow them to vote. Now our book says that in Nebraska, any person who will be 18 by the Tuesday following the first Monday in November, so basically when presidential elections take place or general elections take place, if you're going to be 18 by that day, you actually can vote in any election held in that calendar year. That's what our textbook says. I did not find anything to that effect. If you look on Canvas under Lesson 2, I did put the voting requirements for Nebraska and what is listed there, but I did not find this particular one that our book says that they are allowed to vote. Okay, just so you know that historically, young voters have been less likely to vote. So number 13 there, which group is least likely to vote? That is young voters. Historically, they've been less likely to vote. In 1972, only 48%, or sorry, in 1972, actually that's a pretty good number. 48% of 18 to 20-year-olds did vote. In 2000, that was down to 28%. I don't have current figures, but it has been a little bit higher in these last couple of elections from what I had seen, but I didn't go back and look up actual percentages for that. Again, we talked about Vietnam being a significant event for lowering age. Voter registration, that's another one here. Most states do require you to register in order to vote. You don't have to register in North Dakota to vote. And as I said, in Nebraska, you can actually register the same day that you move to Nebraska. There's been a lot of controversy with registering to vote and making it easier for people to vote. Basically, what you have to do when you go to vote, you'll have to provide them with your age, your name, where you were born, your legal address, how long you've lived there. And usually you have to go to the county clerk who keeps a record of all of the eligible voters. But they have started making that a little bit easier. Now they sometimes do rallies, or they'll have special type of, I don't know what I want to say here, special events where they try to register people to vote, especially if there's a big issue coming up. Some people think that the registration process in Nebraska or in the United States should be eliminated because it discriminates against people who are poor or uneducated. But again, they're trying to make it a lot easier to vote or to register for that reason. Europe actually has a lot higher voter registration rates than the United States because when you are a citizen, you are automatically registered to vote. United States is the only country where voters choose whether or not they want to register to vote. Again, in an effort to try and make it a little bit easier, they passed the Voter Act of 1933. I don't think I have this on the review or on the PowerPoint. But they do make it a lot easier to vote. And when you go to register for a driver's license, you will get automatically registered to vote. Another thing that they usually ask you about when you go to vote is what political party you want to register for. So when you have your primary elections, what political party's ballot are you going to receive? In Nebraska, I wasn't aware of this. I thought it was just Republican or Democrat. You can also register as a Libertarian and vote in the Libertarian primary in Nebraska as well. Other things that I have on here that you need to make sure that you know here has to do with purging. Okay, there are laws that require that every 2 to 4 years that a state would actually go through their registration records and purge anybody who has died or is no longer eligible to vote. And it forbids the states to purge for any other reason. Okay, if you don't vote, that's not a way to get purged. They cannot take you off the books just because you voted or didn't vote. But if you've moved or no longer eligible in that county, or if you've passed away, then you will be purged from those records. Here we go with the Voter Registration Act. I got ahead of myself here. And again, this is where we talked about with driver's license. They allow you to register to vote. And again, there's lots of different ways to register. You can do it through a special event, through the Voter Registration Act. You can do it by mail, by fax, lots of different ways to get registered now. Photo ID, this has become an issue in a lot of states. In 2005, Indiana passed a law that says that you needed a photo ID in order to vote. And several other states started doing that as well to make sure that people were eligible. In 2008, the Supreme Court ruled that that was constitutional, and states can require you to have an ID to vote in order to prevent voter fraud. Most Americans, polls and things would say that most Americans are in favor of this. As far as historical criteria for voting and how some people have been discriminated against, it was very common to discriminate against people among some of the states. We talked about some of this yesterday. One of the ways that they discriminated against, especially African Americans, for voting was a literacy test, saying that you had to be able to read and write in order to be able to vote. This is a sample literacy test. This actually comes from Louisiana in 1964. And you can see the sample question there. Draw a line through the 2 letters below that come last in the alphabet. Of course, there's only 1 letter that comes last in the alphabet, but it would probably mean the last 2. It's, again, some of the questions spell backwards, forwards. They're trying to trick you sometimes with some of these tests. Another one that I'm not sure if we talked about this one yesterday or not here was the grandfather clause. The grandfather clause said if you were a male and you or your descendants, so maybe your father or your grandfather, if they were able to vote in 1870, you could become a legal voter without having to pay a poll tax or pass a literacy test. Basically what happened is you had a lot of white people that could not read and write and would not have been able to pass the literacy test. And so when they put the African Americans, when they were allowed to vote with the 15th Amendment, they started passing these grandfather clauses and grandfathering white citizens in so that they would still be eligible to vote. And it was aimed at discriminating against African Americans so they would not be able to vote. And the poll tax, which we also talked about, was used in order to discriminate, especially against African Americans, in order to be able to vote. Well, that should be the end of the lesson here. I think we have Oh, nope, we still have one more slide here, sorry. Okay, as far as who are not allowed to vote, there are three groups of people who most states do not allow to vote. If they